LeBron James, how does it feel to know that if you're not eventually a Hall of Fame caliber player, it's not good enough to be good or an all-star. If you're not eventually a first-rank Hall of Famer, a lot of people will say you were a bust or overhyped.
Since LeBron James has been a teenager, he has had the most expectations for an athlete we have ever seen. With this comes the most scrutiny that we've ever seen from an athlete. He was a projected #1 overall pick by his junior year of high school at 17 years old and skipped the whole college development route to get drafted at age 18. With the change to the NBA draft rules, not letting high schoolers getting drafted after 2006, we've seen a big change in the draft. We mostly see a lot of the top prospects now do one-and-done seasons in college, at high blue blood schools, or some guys even take smaller school routes and average a lot of points. But the fact that players aren't getting drafted out of high school means that they needed to do something else. They either needed to go to college for a year, or in some other instances, like we've seen with players like LaMelo Ball, maybe go overseas for a year. But now we are also starting to see European players come out of pro leagues as high schoolers too, age 18, around age 19 that we've seen, and that is a big change to the draft as the NBA is expanding to places like Europe, and a lot of these top prospects are coming from there at young ages. Many prospects have emerged as stars throughout the past 20 years, most of them not really living up to their potential, but we have not seen a prospect that has been as hyped as LeBron was until now with Victor Wembanyama. Victor Wembanyama is a 7'5" freak of nature who essentially has no holes in his game and has been competing at a pro level since the age of 15. And we've seen this with a lot of international stars that get drafted, like Luka Doncic, have been playing pro basketball overseas since they were 14 or 15 years old. And that's how they come into the NBA already with so much in their bag. This really is the first instance that we've seen a international player get this much hype as a #1 overall pick. We've seen some guys come over from overseas and get drafted #1 overall like Yao Ming, but he didn't have as much hype as Victor Wembanyama has. And I think that is also partially because of the social media era that we're in right now, but there is so much that this kid has, and his potential is through the roof. At 7'5", being able to shoot, and what we've seen, I mean, everyone's seen the play of him missing a three-pointer and getting a putback dunk. That's just insane. And since Kevin Durant, we've seen that 7-foot players can be great shooters too. So this will definitely open up the door for him, and we'll have to see how he does in his career. But if we're talking about hyping up players, he is not even close to what we saw to LeBron James's hype coming into the NBA. When I think about hype behind a player, I honestly think that Victor Wembanyama is a little closer to Zion Williamson than LeBron James. And if we really sit down and think about it, everyone was waiting for that next Zion highlight. Looking through him playing college and high school, everyone was waiting to see what would Zion do in a game. We went into college, I personally remember watching every single Duke game because I was like, this guy is an athletic freak. He shouldn't be doing this at his size. Who does that remind me of? Victor Wembanyama. And both of these guys too, the main knock that people have on Zion going into the draft, the main knock that people had on Victor going into this draft, can they stay healthy?
Wemby very well could be a star right out of the gates, but the one problem is how often he'd be able to be on the court. He hasn't even gotten to the NBA yet, and he's got quite a history with injuries. He's missed half a season and playoffs thanks to an unspecified muscular injury. He's missed several months due to fractured fingers, bone contusions in his shoulder, fibula stretch fractures, and most recently, a back muscle injury that ended his season early in 2022.
And both of these guys are just athletic freaks for their size. And that's why I think both of these guys are very comparable. We compare them to LeBron James, the hype surrounding them, but LeBron was on a different level. And I think Victor, very close to Zion. I think Victor definitely has more potential than Zion will, just because of his natural size, being 7'5" and being able to shoot the three ball that well. But I do think that if we're comparing the hype overall and just how they play in general, we're going to compare Victor a little more to Zion Williamson, especially because we've seen what happened in Zion's career up to this point. Being injured, that is definitely a concern for Victor Wembanyama too. Obviously, we don't hope that he gets injured, but it's definitely a possibility that has to be put on the table. And if you're the Spurs, you have to realize that at some point with that frame, it is potential that Victor Wembanyama could get hurt. And just to compare the hype too, I mean, Zion Williamson, a lot of people knew about him in high school, but that senior year of high school before he got to Duke, kind of when people really started to pay attention to him. Victor Wembanyama, we knew about him a year ago, kind of that's when the buzz started to come around as the #1 overall pick in this year's draft. But back to the topic at hand, LeBron James high school games were being nationally televised on ESPN against Carmelo Anthony, which is absolutely insane to think about, especially now. I mean, we're in the age of social media where we see all these high school highlights, but I don't even think I would sit down and watch a high school game if it was nationally televised on ESPN, and there still is some, but I don't even know if I've ever sat down and actually watched one. But when LeBron James was on ESPN, you can look at the viewership. That game, absolutely amazing for the numbers for ESPN. And that's what I'm trying to get at. The point is, people were watching LeBron James in high school play. The NBA tried to get Victor Wembanyama's games, and I'm sure there are a few people who watched them, but I just wasn't as interested in watching Victor Wembanyama play overseas. But if you look at the stats and the amount of people that watch LeBron James' high school game, it's just completely different. The hype around LeBron at that time, out of this world. Now, this is no knock on Victor, and I still think he's probably the most hyped prospect since LeBron, but if we're looking at the differences, there's a big gap between these two, and we can pull up any clips, people talking about LeBron James since he was in high school. I don't remember the last time that I've heard someone talk about a high schooler in any aspect as much as they were talking about LeBron in 2003 and 2002.
Best?
Yeah.
I read something where you said you want to be best defender, best shooter, best pass. What do you have to improve on between now and the NBA?
Maybe getting stronger defensively and shooting the three.
This 10 TV interview with Kirk Herbstreit was conducted back in 2001 when James was just 16 years old. And even as a teenager, James was great, but he was driven to get better. And he had some help from his mom.
How do you avoid complacency as an individual when everywhere you turn, you're the man, you're the #1 sophomore in the nation? What pushes you to continue to get better?
You know, every day you gotta go out there and work because there's someone out there working too. And if you stop, I think they can pass you up. So every day, my coaches push me, I push myself, and my teammates push me. My mother brought me up real good. And it's pretty easy because the way I was brought up, she taught me so much things besides basketball, and that helps me be level.
It's crazy to look back now and see that they were interviewing a 16-year-old sophomore, asking him if he would make it to the NBA, and him talking about how great he would want to be in the NBA. I don't think we'll ever see this happen again. I mean, there's been phenomenal prospects that we've seen throughout the years, like I talked about. With Zion Williamson, we knew him in high school. Even with Lonzo, LaMelo Ball, all of them, we knew about them in high school. But they didn't have the expectations to be the greatest in the NBA. LeBron went into the NBA draft in 2003, expected to be one of the greatest players of all time, expected to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. And the way that he lived up to those expectations is somehow phenomenal still to this day. But we will never see another prospect that will be as hyped as that. Victor Wembanyama has been hyped up, and there's a good reason for that. I think with his skill set, he can be an all-time great. But if we're talking about prospects, he has not been as hyped up as LeBron was, even with the social media era. There is a lot of potential for Victor Wembanyama, obviously, as a 7'5" player that can shoot the ball, that can pass, that can play defense, and just being that tall in general. If you can be 7'5" and shoot the three ball, you will be a great player because everything else will come after that too. We saw what happened with Kevin Durant. He was really the first player that we saw at 7 feet tall being able to shoot the ball like that, and that has opened up the gates for players like Victor Wembanyama. But when we talk about hyped players all time, we can't compare Victor Wembanyama to LeBron. He has had more outlets, including all of social media, and obviously he's been hyped up, but like we saw, LeBron was being interviewed by ESPN at 16, 17, 18 years old, and I don't think we'll ever see a prospect be that hyped up again. Victor Wembanyama might be the closest that we get to LeBron. I'm sure there will be another guy within the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, but there will never be a player as hyped up as LeBron, like we saw at the beginning of the video. They told a 17-year-old kid that wasn't even in the NBA yet that if he wasn't a first ballot Hall of Famer, he would be a disappointment and a bust in the NBA. Just remember that.